A fairly well-known member of the First Amendment auditing community is standing on the steps of City Hall expressing some political speech when he's approached by two officers who are not happy with what he's doing. Let's take a look at what happened and get a better idea of who's right, who's wrong, and whose side the law is actually on.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
God bless our homeless veterans. Please pray for our homeless vets.
Hey, here you go.
Oh, thanks. I'm not homeless myself. I just like to come out in public and say God bless the homeless veterans.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm not taking a minute.
Oh,
But thank you. God bless you. You have a blessed day. Thank you. It's very kind of you. Thank you. Okay.
How you doing, man? You got some ID on you?
Good morning, gentlemen. God bless our homeless veterans.
Yep, I'm a vet too, man.
All right, cool.
Air Force.
All right.
All right, so that's a little bit of a weird way to start an interaction. Hey, how you doing? Do you have an ID? Kind of a weird way to start an interaction, but he is being somewhat friendly besides that, so let's just see what happens here.
You got your ID on you?
What for?
Vagrancy.
Okay, so at this point, he's directly asking for an identification, and he's citing vagrancy, which is something that is used a lot of times, right? You'll hear vagrancy, you'll hear loitering, you'll hear some of these terms thrown around in interactions like this. And typically what you'll see is that the officer just does not understand the law, because one of the conditions of most of these laws is that you have to be in a place without a purpose. Obviously, in this case, this auditor is here with a purpose, right? Literally on the steps of City Hall, holding a sign, sharing a message. That would be his purpose. And I would have to find the specific statute from within Waveland, Mississippi itself, but generally speaking, vagrancy statutes in Mississippi have been ruled unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court. Mississippi Code Title 97 Crimes, Chapter 35 used to cover vagrancy, but it was vacated by the Supreme Court. And the only real way that a person can be charged with vagrancy in Mississippi is if they're threatening someone or doing something like jumping in front of traffic. Now, the other thing this officer may mean when he says vagrancy is more like loitering, which would prohibit people or individuals from loitering, loafing, wandering, standing, or remaining idle in a public place for the purpose of obstructing or impeding the use of those properties. Obviously, Jeff clearly has a reason for being there, and he isn't there to obstruct or impede. He's not endangering anybody. He's not jumping out in front of traffic. And so obviously, neither of these two potential interpretations would apply in this situation.
Vagrancy.
Yes, sir. Got several complaints on here. You're begging for food, money, stuff like that.
That's not true.
Okay, well, I'm just out here for that reason.
Okay.
So, do you have your ID on you?
Am I required to give you ID?
Yes, you are.
What would happen if I don't give it to you?
You're going to jail.
Okay, so yet again, this officer seems to do nothing but misstate the law. The only time you have to identify in Mississippi is when you are operating a vehicle. Now, Mississippi is not a stop and identify state, so even if they suspected Jeff here, the auditor, of committing a crime, he wouldn't be under an obligation to identify, right? He is obviously being detained at this point, at least in the mind of this officer, because the officer is demanding ID from him. He came up, he was moderately friendly walking out from the car, and then as soon as they got into the interaction, just became extremely aggressive, at least in my opinion. The only thing that Jeff would have to worry about here is if he falsely identifies, right? And so you don't have to give an identification in Mississippi unless you're driving a car. And if you lie to the officer, that's when you could be in trouble, right? Mississippi Code Title 97, under the subsection 97-9-79, any person who shall make or cause to be made any false statement or representation to his or another person's identity shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction thereof, fined no more than $5,000 or imprisoned for a term not to exceed 1 year or both. Obviously, Jeff isn't misidentifying, he's just not identifying. So the only way this officer could legally take action for Jeff not giving him his government ID is if Jeff lied about his identifying information.
Period.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Sir, I'm standing on a public sidewalk engaged in constitutionally protected
Correct.
activity.
Correct. But I'm letting you know you're gonna go to jail, no questions asked.
Even if I'm standing on a public
Yes,
sidewalk?
yes. How many times do I gotta explain it to you?
So if I don't give you ID, I'm
Yeah,
going to
you're
jail.
going to jail for failure to identify.
Can I just leave?
As we talked about before, there is no such thing as failure to identify in Mississippi. The only thing that would really be rolled into that is if Jeff lied about his identification. He's under no obligation, unless he's driving a vehicle, to identify to Sergeant Joffrey.
If you wish to do so, but I need to identify you.
I don't wish to do so. I'd like to stay here and express my...
You're not gonna stay here, period. I'm gonna let you know.
Do I have to leave?
Yes,
Why?
because I'm instructing you. I'm giving you a lawful order to leave.
Okay, so this is a phrase police officers like to throw out because it's typically derived from the actual language of statutes. For him to give a lawful order for Jeff to leave the steps of City Hall, Jeff would, generally speaking, have to be committing a crime, right? It's very difficult to remove someone from public property, especially when they're expressing their rights, which is what Jeff is doing here, unless they're otherwise committing a crime. So if Jeff was soliciting in the middle of an intersection, right? We talked earlier about how in Mississippi, the only thing that's really like loitering, loafing, vagrancy is if they're aggressively panhandling, right? Like chasing cars down, then he might have some legs to stand on. He can ask that Jeff relocates, but he has no lawful authority to demand that he leaves.
And if I don't leave,
You're going to jail
I'll go to jail.
for
And
failure.
your officer, Sergeant Joffrey in?
Sergeant Joffrey, Officer Andrews.
All right, y'all have a good day.
You got your ID with you?
So if I don't leave, I'll go to jail.
Yep. Give me your ID first.
And if I don't give you ID, I'll go to jail.
Yes.
Even though I've explained to you that I'm engaged in constitutionally protected
I don't
activity,
care if you explain it to me or not.
safeguarded by the First Amendment. It's
Okay.
freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly on a traditional public forum, the steps of City Hall.
Correct.
I'm
Yeah.
not begging for
You got
money.
your ID?
Okay, so at this point, this officer clearly is demonstrating that he either lacks the understanding of the law or just really doesn't care about this interaction. He's used to getting his way. He's used to people just complying with him. And even just this little bit of pushback from Jeff here it kind of shows you what appear to be his true colors when people push back against his authority. This officer, Sergeant Joffrey, literally says, I don't care what kind of activity you are engaged in. He probably should be, given that Jeff is standing in a traditional public forum, engaged in a protected form of speech, and can't legally be asked to leave or even really identify unless he's doing something, a crime, that would also allow them to remove him from public property in one of the most traditional public forums possible, the steps of City Hall.
I'm not begging for money.
Okay. You got your ID?
Do I need?
Okay, so at this point, Jeff said, I'm not begging for money, trying to see if this officer is really asking for his identification in relation to some sort of a panhandling statute, right? That could be lumped under what Sergeant Joffrey understands to be vagrancy, which again was struck down by the Mississippi State Supreme Court. And generally speaking, vagrancy or panhandling laws are considered unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that begging or panhandling passively, right, simply asking people for money and not chasing people down or running into the intersection like we were talking about a minute ago, is considered to be protected speech and is covered as a charitable appeal for funds.
I need to show you my ID.
You need to show me your ID. Yes, sir.
Or what?
You're going to jail.
Well, you guys, I tell you, man. I'm going to put you on notice before I show you my ID and before you do all this.
No, you're going to show me your ID right now.
Okay.
Then you can do whatever you wish after that.
You guys are idiots,
All right.
man.
Okay. That's your opinion.
You guys really are
Central
dumb,
Florida,
dumb as a
yeah.
bag of hammers.
Okay. That's perfectly
Let
fine.
me get back up here. I'm trying to leave.
George 600-433-700081.
Is my ID going to tell you if I'm committing a crime or not?
433-700081.
What
Doesn't
is-
matter if you commit a crime or not. You have to identify in reference to a complaint because you're violating.
You know, you need to have reasonable articulable suspicion.
Okay, so the sergeant just said, it doesn't matter if you're committing a crime or not, we're investigating you, and therefore you are committing a crime, is essentially what he's implying here. Again, he's showing a misunderstanding, to be generous, of how the identification laws in the state of Mississippi work.
that a crime is afoot. You
Yeah,
didn't.
I do have reasonable suspicion. I just instructed you. So,
Vagrancy?
yeah.
What ordinance is that?
City ordinance. Go
Even
look it
though
up.
I've explained to you that I'm
You
engaged
don't
in
need to-
constitutionally
you
protected.
don't need to explain anything to me because I literally don't care. I'm
Wow.
not here in reference to a complaint
All right.
by the mayor of this city.
Okay, so this officer, again, just showed his true colors here. He said, I literally don't care what it is that you're doing. The mayor is saying that you're committing a crime, and therefore I'm going to illegally ask you for identification. Not ask, require, right? Because he has the right to ask, but he does not have the right to demand identification from the auditor in this case. Quite honestly, the complaining party, whoever makes the initial call, is utterly irrelevant, whether it's a little old lady that's in one of those houses back here or the mayor of the city. That is one side of the story. When he comes to the scene and sees that this auditor is engaged in a First Amendment protected activity, that is the other side of the story. His job as a law enforcement officer is to enforce the law, which explicitly allows this type of activity, especially in traditional public forums like the steps of City Hall. It doesn't matter if it's the mayor or the president of the United States, you can't violate someone's constitutional rights just because someone complained about it.
The mayor.
By the mayor of the city.
Okay.
If you have any complaints, you can send him an email, call him later on.
You know what, at this point, I'm gonna remain silent because this is obviously, you guys,
This isn't some free will state, man. This is how it is in the state of Mississippi.
so you don't have freedom in the state of Mississippi?
If you don't like it, you can go back to Florida. Period.
All right, well, let me have my ID and I'll go back to Florida.
I'll give you ID once it comes back.
I don't want to go to jail. And you're a veteran.
I'm a veteran, yes.
What
sir.
did you serve?
Huh?
Where did you serve?
That's none of your business.
All right. Did you take?
That's kind of a weird reaction since at the very beginning of this interaction, he said, I'm a veteran too, and I believe he said Air Force. So at this point, he's just being outwardly hostile and acting, in my opinion, a little bit like a child because Jeff didn't give him what he wanted immediately.
Take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution when you served?
I absolutely did.
Yeah, and you're not doing that right now.
Okay, that's your
Did you
opinion.
take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution when
that
you
is your opinion.
became a cop?
That is your opinion.
Then you're not doing it right now.
That's your opinion.
You guys are a supervisor?
I'm the supervisor.
Okay, well, that's a little bit of a terrifying thought, given how this interaction has gone so far. And this is something you'll see a lot in these types of videos, someone asking for a supervisor. And although asking for a supervisor is something you will see a lot of times, often with the hope that it's going to resolve the issue, having someone wiser than the person you're dealing with, supervisors aren't always available. And while it's often the policy of departments to call a supervisor when asked, it's not typically required by law. And looking at the Waveland Police Department website, it looks like they only have a handful of officers. Sergeant Joffrion obviously is a sergeant. It could be possible that he is the highest ranking person on duty right now, although he obviously has several bosses, one of whom would be the mayor who ordered them to begin this interaction to start with.
I better start recording this.
You can start recording. We've been recording the whole time since we made contact.
Told you I'm not panhandling. I'm just coming out saying God bless the homeless veteran on this public sidewalk at the steps of City Hall. You don't care. I'm going to jail.
I just say you was going to jail.
You never said I was going to jail? Oh boy, I wish I was recording before.
Ironically, I would be curious to see if spitting or anything like that is a violation of a city ordinance in a city like this. But at this point, it's very interesting to see that this officer is saying that he never said he would take them to jail. Obviously, Jeff was smart enough to record this entire interaction to see that that was the threat. That was the reason he handed over his identification to begin with, is because the officer said he would arrest him if he did not, which even if he didn't say it explicitly, which he did several times, would imply that he would be handcuffing him and hauling him off to jail.
You guys said you're recording? Yep. Can you get body camera videos in the state of Mississippi through a public record request?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so this is either a lie or an outright misunderstanding of the law. My leaning is kind of towards the first thing. This guy doesn't like to have his authority challenged in any way. He doesn't want this interaction to go any further. He knows he's outside of the bounds of the law here, and he doesn't want anybody to ever see this. Unfortunately for him, Jeff is recording this, and by the way, Mississippi, like every other state, you do have a process to be able to get body camera footage. And in fact, I've seen some body camera videos from these officers starting to pop up. Obviously, you can request body camera footage under the Mississippi Public Records Act. Interestingly, one of the few exceptions to when body camera footage would be given to the public is if the person being recorded by the body camera asks that the footage is kept private for some sort of privacy reason. So if Jeff requested that the footage is kept private, then maybe this would be the case. The recorder, Sergeant Joffrion, has no ability to keep that footage private, and it is available under the Mississippi Public Records Act.
Central 1114.
Go ahead.
10-4, that 27's going to come back to a Marcus Jeffrey, valid, -29s, -4s.
Come on. All right, Mr. Jeffrey, you're free to go.
Pretty good. Can I
All
stay?
right. No, you cannot stay. You got to go.
So if I don't go, I'll go to jail.
Correct. You're a lawful order not to come back. Have a good evening.
Okay, so yet again, this officer says, I gave you a lawful order. And the reason he's using that language is that's often the language that's in these state statutes. As mentioned previously, his orders are based on nothing more than if we're being generous, a misunderstanding of the law. That being said, if you want to challenge his authority, that's a roll of the dice. And given his general attitude during this entire interaction, it would have, without a doubt, led to this auditor being placed in handcuffs and fighting for his rights inside of a hot Mississippi prison. If you thought this interaction was a little bit insane for somebody simply exercising their rights in public, well-established rights, you won't believe what happens when a journalist challenges a New York Police Department policy against filming in their precincts. Make sure to check that video out here.